The new season of Dimensional Trials just started this week, and you might have noticed that they are quite challenging. But let me tell you, you can make your life a lot easier if you gear yourself correctly. And that's why I have 6 important tips you need to know when it comes to gearing for Dimensional Trials. We will talk about runes, evasion versus endurance, hit thresholds and more. And especially my last tip is a super easy way to heavily increase your damage in trials. I've also just learned this week. So let me get to my first tip, and this one is all about runes in your accessories. You might be wondering what runes should you put in there. And if you want to deal damage, there is just one solution for Dimensional Trials. You put an offensive rune called boss heavy attack chance into every single rune socket. So in every accessory you put it 3 times. If you use 2 weapons of the same type, like 2 melee weapons such as spear and greatsword, then you can even go for boss melee heavy attack chance, which gives you a total of 960 boss melee heavy attack chance. So when you hit a boss as a melee, you get 960 heavy attack chance. Now as a liberator you don't have 2 weapons of the same type. You have a ranged and a magic weapon. So you can't go here for the specific runes. But you still go for boss heavy attack chance, which gives you 720 heavy attack chance, which is still incredible good. At this point you might be thinking, but then I don't get any rune synergies, and aren't there a lot of diminishing returns? Yes, you don't get any rune synergies, and yes, there are diminishing returns. But you have to understand that heavy attack chance is by far one of the best stats in the game, at least when it comes to dealing damage. Let me give you an example. If you have 500 heavy attack chance, that's a 33% chance to deal double damage. This means on average you deal 33% more damage. And if you increase that to 1000 heavy attack chance, that's a 50% chance to heavy hit, which increases again your damage by 50%. In other words, 20% more damage on average compared to 500, which is still a 20% damage increase. That's why the first 1000 heavy attack chance is a must-have in every PvE build. But you can even go higher. Of course there are diminishing returns, but since it's just a percentage damage increase, it's insanely broken. If you're also doing PvP, I know that it's annoying to change the runes all the time. But if you're doing longer trial sessions with your mates, just change your runes, because you will massively increase your damage and make your runs just so much easier. Now let's move over to my second tip, which is related to a question I get asked really often. How much hit do you need in PvE? Some people say you need 500 hit, others say you need 800 hit. Everyone has a different opinion on that. So what does hit actually do? It lets you land attacks on players who have evasion. If your hit is higher than your enemy's evasion, you will just always hit. If your hit is lower, then they have a chance to evade your attack. But here's the thing. All monsters in the game have 0 evasion. That means it does not matter how much hit you have in PvE, you will always land your damage skills. You can have 100 hit or you can have 1000 hit. It does not change anything on your damage. However, it's important to note that this only applies to damage abilities. It does not count for auto attacks. Those can still miss. But let's be honest here. For most classes, auto attacks deal absolutely 0 meaningful damage. So it's kinda whatever. Additionally, there are also CC abilities that only have a chance to apply their effect. For example, Strategic Rush has a base 70% chance to push your target, so you can also miss the skill. And even if you go higher on hit, this will not increase your chance to hit the ability. So yes, auto attacks and CC abilities can miss, but all your damage abilities will always hit. Now it's important to have an eye on that when you do your PvE gear. Take the Forgotten Lotus gloves for example. They give you 125 hit. But in PvE, that stat is completely useless. It's just a wasted stat. If you do your PvE build, you should try not to build any hit. Because instead of hit, you could of course have something else. So hit is just completely useless. Now let's come to my third tip, which is again related to a question I get asked really often, and that's: should you build endurance or evasion for PvE? So what are both of these stats doing? Endurance reduces the chance of your enemy to crit, and evasion gives you a chance to evade an attack. Now, to answer this question, we need to understand how much hit and crit our monsters have. And drum rolls please. Monsters have 0 critical hit chance and 0 hit chance. So what does that mean? Endurance reduces the crit chance of your enemy. Now the problem is that our enemies don't have any crit, so we can't reduce their crit chance. But if monsters hit you, they also always roll between their min and their max damage. So for example, this guy here hits us for 291 and now for 245 damage. So it always varies because it rolls between his min and his max damage. But if you now have more endurance than your enemy crit, then you also have a chance to always make him roll the min damage. This is called glancing. So that means we have the chance to reduce the damage of monsters if we build endurance even though they don't have crit. That's already pretty decent, but now let's come to evasion. Usually to counter evasion you need hit, but if monsters don't have any hit, they also can't reduce our evasion. And evasion compared to endurance not only reduces the damage, it also evades the complete attack, which could mean a stun, a pushback or whatsoever. And both stats actually have the same chances. So for example, 500 evasion would give you a chance to evade an attack by 33%, and 500 endurance would give you a 33% chance for him to roll min damage. And for 1000 evasion or endurance you would increase that chance to 50%. So what is better, evasion or endurance? Do you just want to reduce the damage or completely evade the attack? It's always 100% evasion. Being able to evade the complete damage and also the effect of the skill is way better than just reducing the damage. Just imagine a boss trying to knock you up with a skill, but you're just evading the attack. It's so incredibly good. Oh, Wolfgang has a question, 1 second. Oh, that's a really great question. So Wolfgang just asked, what is the best attack type to build evasion against? So here it really depends on what annoys you usually. If you have problems with trash mobs, then just think about what kills you. Melee, magic or ranged. But most of the time trash shouldn't be a problem. And for bosses, you have to understand that all the attacks from the bosses also fall into the 3 different attack types. So an ability from a boss can be coded as a ranged, a melee or a magic attack. I've not tested that for all bosses, but from what I know, most attacks fall either into the melee or magic category. So I would personally always go for melee and magic evasion and not for ranged evasion. Does that answer your question, Wolfgang? Yes? Perfect. So we just talked about 2 of the defensive stats in the game, but there are of course many more. And that's why my next tip is to focus on the right defensive stats. Because most of the stats in the game are completely useless in PvE, especially defensive ones. There are just 2 really good defensive stats, and that's max HP and skill damage resistance. All other stats are 99% of the time completely useless. But now you might ask, what about damage reduction? Does it not also reduce the damage of all attacks also from bosses? Yes, of course it does reduce the damage a bit. But let's say the tank uses Bastion, okay? To give everyone 100 damage reduction before a boss attack. 99% of all boss attacks hits once really heavily, dealing maybe 5k or 10k damage, and 100 damage reduction only reduces that by 100. That's why in PvE every good tank uses the damage bastion, because the normal one is completely useless. Same goes for debuff duration and similar stats. Of course they have some minimal impact, but it's so low and so situational, it's really not important. But of course having more max HP and skill damage resistance is super important. Max HP just gives you a higher life pool, and skill damage resistance reduces the damage of all mechanics. You need to have that if you want to push high dimensional trials. So focus on the right defensive stats. Okay, so let's come to the next step. The Deadly Marker nerf brought a lot of changes, and you might have noticed that you sometimes have downtimes where all your skills are on cooldown. And of course, then you deal damage with your auto attacks. But as mentioned earlier, for most classes they deal 0 damage with auto attacks compared to damage abilities. But to be a good DPS you need to have good damage abilities that you can spam non-stop. And that's what you need to achieve with your class. Before the Deadly Marker nerf, every build mainly focused on building as much attack speed as possible, because you wanted to utilize the short cooldowns you get from Deadly Markers. But now you just have one Deadly Marker and you need to shift your priority. It doesn't help if you can use your abilities really fast and then have 5 seconds downtime. So for example, instead of focusing on dexterity in your build, you could start focusing more on Wisdom. Wisdom also gives max damage as dexterity, but additionally it now gives cooldown speed instead of attack speed. So what I want you to understand is that in Throne of Liberty in PvE, you need to be able to spam abilities if you want to be a good DPS. If you can't do that with your build, then your build is probably trash. Auto attacks just deal 0 damage for 99% of the classes. You need to find ways to get good cooldown speed into your build, and additionally don't stack too much attack speed if you don't have the cooldown speed to support it. And additionally, all the builds that you currently find online are outdated after the recent patch. We have to theorycraft new builds. Now let's come to the last tip, and this one is about species damage. You have that on a few weapons, the masteries, and you have some buff foods for it. Maybe you've seen that already, and maybe you ask yourself, how good is that stat actually? I did some testing here this week and it turned out that this stat is completely broken. It works similarly to skill damage boost. It's a simple percentage damage increase against a different species. Now I have 2 weapons here that both give me 64 species damage. So in total around 130. So how much of a damage increase is that? Drum roll again. It's around 12% damage increase against all monsters with all my attacks. This is of course completely insane. Just getting 12% more damage on top of everything else is just crazy. And in my case here, these weapon stats for my Invocator are also super strong. Every weapon has one of those species weapon variants, but not all of them have amazing stats. So you have to ask yourself, is it good enough or not? But you should at least consider it for your PvE build, because getting a 6% overall damage increase from just one weapon is huge. The stat effect on other weapons needs to be insane to overcome this 6% damage boost. Additionally, you of course want to take all the additional species damage you can find in your masteries, and you want to have the correct buff food if you're doing dimensional trials. It's just a super simple stat to increase your damage in PvE. Okay, these are my 6 tips for gearing in dimensional trials. I hope that helped and gave you an idea of what good players are doing to maximize their damage in dimensional trials. If you have further questions, don't hesitate and ask me in the comments. I'm also streaming on Twitch and YouTube now, so you can also join me live to ask your questions. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see ya in the next one.